Hey, everybody, this is Chris French. I'm with Seth Eisen today. We are live from 1506 Haight Street, where San Francisco Heritage has a storefront that we make available to the community. And today I have a very special guest, Seth Eisen. Seth, hey.
Hi.
Welcome for being here
So
today.
excited. We've been planning this for months.
We are here because Seth is running a really interesting live what was they say, a performance walking tour so that you can get involved in it. And it's really interesting. It's a very twist on a walking tour perspective. It gives you a lot of history while you're walking. And then also you learn something about the community and about the buildings while you're on this tour. So I wanted to have Seth, what I did was I participated in a dress rehearsal and I took some photos, and I want Seth to maybe explain to us about the history of what we're going to be looking at and how you can get involved in this tour. It's going to be running mostly on the weekends, and we'll have all that information for you. What I'll do is I will share this screen, which will take me a second to get everything organized. And let's see. I did it the wrong way. So if anybody is watching, you can go ahead and type some questions into the Facebook, and we'll see if we can find you as soon as I keep hitting the wrong button, but we will get there soon enough. Here we go. I'm doing this just from a laptop, which I don't usually do. And so we're just going to have a little bit of tech here. Okay. Now everybody can watch this video go. All right. We are there. So thank you for your patience. I'm going to start with Seth Eisen. Welcome to our live webinar. We're at 1506 Haight Street. And Seth, why don't you tell me a little bit about your new show, Out of Sight, Sylvester, the Mighty Reel.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you about it. This has been more than a year in the making, this particular production, but I would say it's probably 25 years that I've been dreaming about this project. Sylvester is someone who's a queer ancestor, is very near and dear to my heart. I've always had a very deep affinity for Sylvester and Sylvester's work in our community. And we, LGBTQ plus people did not have a community 25, 30 years ago. We didn't really have a community to speak of. So it's really been developing since really the 1940s and 50s and really started to kind of come into its fullness in the 1970s. And Chris, you know that we did a show up here with San Francisco Heritage back in 2021, and that featured the lives of two other LGBTQ folks who also lived and worked up here in the Haight, which was Peggy Caserta, who owned the storefront that was just right next door, who invented the bell-bottom jeans and was close friends and lovers with Janis Joplin, and Hibiscus, who was one of the founding members of the gender-bending performance troupe, the Coquettes, who were also located up here. And that was really our first deep dive into the Haight and really working to kind of understand this neighborhood. And, it's like everyone knows about free love and all of that, but not very many people know that, during that period, it was really still a very repressive period for gay and lesbian, transgender people, and everyone else that fits into the queer category. So, I think it was, to me, what I see when I come up here is thinking like, wow, there's no LGBTQ history that's visible. And so this was our opportunity, thanks to San Francisco Heritage, to really help make those histories more visible. And so it's been a really exciting project, really starting back in 2020, 2021, when I began doing the interviews of people who were, queer, LGBTQ plus, who lived in this neighborhood or worked in this neighborhood during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And during that period, I was doing some research about my beloved Sylvester. And I was like, wow, I had always thought about doing a show dedicated to Sylvester that we could produce. But we didn't do it the first time because it was really important to just get a sense more of the neighborhood. But how this came about was like, when thinking about, if you know, about continuing our collaboration, was who would be someone that not a lot of people know about, but should know about, especially connected to this neighborhood and was really significant, and their connection to the gay liberation movement. And Sylvester, you know, wasn't a protester, you know, out on the front lines in that kind of way, but Sylvester was a deeply talented and feeling person who used his gifts to actually make the music of gay liberation. And
yeah, we can talk about Sylvester. I have some slides here, so we could go forward to the next slide. Oh, here's Mighty Real, which is the title, Out of Sight, Mighty Real, of the show that Seth is putting on. But let's talk about Sylvester for a little bit and how, what an inspiring figure they were.
Yeah. And anyway, just to finish that thought, is like, the reason I was thinking too is like, oh, right. Sylvester's life in San Francisco really began. I mean, Sylvester was originally from LA, but claimed San Francisco as his, you know, as his true home, and lived here for, you know, a good part of his adult life, from his, you know, early 20s on. But I thought it was really interesting that one of the first places he lived was at the Cockettes' house that we stop at on the tour. And then one of the famous places that he performed at was the I-Beam, that's no longer existing.
Is that a bar?
It was a massive club with a very fancy sound system, and it was one of the first of its kind. And it was also really special for us in our community because it was within the first decade of us being able to legally be able to be in a bar dancing with one another and not being arrested for it. So it was a special place where we could just kind of like let go and be free and not be constantly in the fear that we're going to be arrested. And Sylvester was a major star by that time and was performing up here in the Haight. So I just thought, what an interesting bookend to Sylvester's life of like, this is where he lived, and then this is where he performed for many years. So, you know, a person's history happens in many different neighborhoods of the city, but there's a significant piece of Sylvester up here in the Haight that we really wanted to capture in two really key moments. You know, so Sylvester moved to the Cockettes, you know, were this performance troupe, and they lived up here in the Haight. Not going to give away the location, but you can come see the show.
Let's see the show.
And, you know, had a number of different collaborations and bands with, you know, the first, you know, record label that put out Sylvester's music was called Blue Thumb. And then Sylvester used to perform in the Castro at this place called the Elephant Walk, which is right on the corner of Castro and 18th. And it was, you know, this kind of amazing, tiny little place, but it was when Sylvester had really developed his sound over a number of years, incorporating, you know, blues and jazz standards and gospel music. And then this was also during the disco era. So all of that sound together, when he had first started really his collaboration with the two who were known as Two Tons of Fun, Martha Wash and Izora Rhodes, these two fantastic singers from San Francisco, and their sound together was just magic. And he had all these other bands leading up to that, this hot band and all of that, but really it wasn't when they got that sound, and then he got signed onto Fantasy record label, which is in Berkeley, with Harvey Fuqua, who was, you know, a kind of a legend already. You know, made Smokey Robinson, Marvin Gaye, made Marvin Gaye a star, worked with all of these really big names, and was like Sylvester. I, you know, said something like, you know, haven't heard a voice like Sylvester since Marvin Gaye, and, you know, was planning that Sylvester was going to be the next really big star on that label. So, you know, they came, they heard the music, they signed Sylvester, they put the first album out. It did okay, but it was that second album called Step 2, where the song You Make Me Feel Mighty Real, which was really an anthem to gay liberation.
This is 1978, right in there?
Yes.
Okay.
This is 1978.
We're in the 70s, and Right. So I have it up here, step 2, 1978, which I recommend everyone jump on YouTube or buy a record and listen to this song. You will recognize it and remember it if you're from the 70s like we are, right? So anyway, yes, go on.
So yeah, that song, hit the charts. It's like a #1 hit. The album went gold. There were other hits on there like Dance Disco Heat.
Mm-hmm.
And it led to international success for Sylvester and his band. So it was a really amazing moment, really, but also like just kind of like backing up a little bit with the perspective of the history of LGBTQ community at that time. Harvey Milk is running for supervisor, then gets elected as the very first out gay supervisor. You can see Harvey Milk if you come here, and Sylvester in the mural here in the installation. But that was also the year that Harvey Milk was assassinated, along with George Moscone. That was also coincided with the Jonestown massacre. So there was a lot happening that was actually connected both to the Haight and to the Castro. So, the People's Temple were originally up here in the Haight. So there's just a lot going on. And after this hit of Sylvester's came out and this massive loss, Sylvester's dream was to perform at the San Francisco War Memorial Opera House. And that year, they made the date, and it happened to be 3 months after the assassination of Milk and Moscone. And it really served as a balm for a city that was really, really torn apart by what had happened. Here we were like, marching for our rights, and it was like a new era of acceptance and being able to be ourselves. And then this horrible, set of assassinations happened. So it was just a really tough time. So what Sylvester did was really like brought us to the War Memorial Opera House for this concert. There's a live album of it, and it just was such a gift to the city that Mayor Feinstein at the time, who had taken over for Moscone just a few months before, signed a proclamation, made it Sylvester Day, and gave Sylvester the key to the city, because it was really this healing that we went through. It was like, it was going to church, whether you're Christian or not. It was like having a spiritual healing experience. And Sylvester really symbolized that for our community, symbolized really being yourself, being out there. He was really the first kind of out there non-binary artist to really say, yes, I'm gay, and the music industry really tried to manipulate him and tried to put him in a box, but he just would not be pigeonholed. So for a queer out Black person of color to really be out as he was,
the next one, so
in
you
that,
can see some pictures here of Sylvester
in that time was really remarkable.
Yeah, and what I've read about Sylvester would say that he wanted to stand out even in the LGBTQ community. He didn't want to fit in. Like he said, I'm going to be myself in every community that I'm in. So we have some photos here of Sylvester. Maybe you can just talk us through some of these big moments of his life.
Yeah, American Bandstand, 1978, when that Step 2 album came out, and he was on that with the 2 Tons of Fun. I actually recently met the costumer, saw that we were doing this exhibit, and saw Sylvester's name in the window. I mean, again, I just want to say this is really important. The reason that we're doing this show is because 80 to 90% of the people that I talk to and mention Sylvester to never heard of Sylvester. I'm like, how is that possible? Sylvester wasn't just important to us as a queer community, but Sylvester, the song Mighty Real was in 2019, brought to the Library of Congress as a significantly aesthetic song of, of that era.
One of only 600 songs that they have recorded at the Library of Congress for that reason.
That's right.
Yeah. That's really
so
interesting.
It's an important song.
And when we were standing outside, so if you're catching us now, we are live at 1506 Haight, which is in this historic Doolin Larson building, which is run by San Francisco Heritage. And we are community partners with Eisen Productions and working through this. So when Seth and I were getting ready for this webinar and we're standing out front, somebody walks by and says, hey, I was a backup singer for Sylvester. And I think that's where we really get into how important the place is in interpreting history. So to be right here, you're right. Like people just walk by and say, hey, I knew Sylvester.
Right.
So it's that kind of sort of energizing.
It is. So like looking at that picture of the American Bandstand, Sylvester was here in San Francisco and saw somebody at a party. His name was David, and was wearing that and said, oh, honey, I have to have that. And it's a handmade kimono, a hand-painted kimono that this costume designer, David, made. Anyway, David was walking by here and he's like, Sylvester, oh my God, I just did costumes for Sylvester. Do you want to see? So he gave us some of the sketches that we have here in the exhibit. Okay, so you can kind of look at, but it's just so cool to see that. That was a really big deal for Sylvester. Sylvester always knew that he was going to be a star. So he really took to it really well.
And he was so modest. So I just watched that Dick Clark and Sylvester interview, which of course is online if you want to try to find it. And Dick Clark was asking Sylvester, why did you pick San Francisco? And he said it was a happy medium between New York and Los Angeles. So that is one of the reasons San Francisco is so special, I think, to him. He could find himself here is what he was talking about. And then also what I found in the archives were a couple photographs of Sylvester performing, and then some of the albums that made him so famous. I wanted to, what about this one?
Yeah, this one down here.
The one in the lower right of the screen.
Right hand screen is a photo from an event that happened at Glide Memorial Church, which is another connection because the minister of celebration at Glide Memorial Church is Marvin K. White, and who was the writer for this production. And I just thought it was really beautiful. Somebody at Glide pointed this photo out to me and said, did you know that Sylvester performed at Glide in 1972 when he was still with the Cockettes? And they had a marriage between Raggedy Ann and Andy at Glide, if you can imagine, with snakes and like aerial artists hanging off the rafters. I mean, if you've ever been in that church, it's so amazing. So at the time, Cecil Williams, who was the minister at that point, long history of making Glide so internationally well known. And one of the reasons was how welcoming Glide was to queer people. So the Cockettes performed there, Sylvester performed there, also just, as himself. But this photo is actually part of that first event that happened. And I think, one of the reasons that's very special in looking at this in context with all the others is that, Sylvester was really part of the counterculture movement here in San Francisco, performing with the Cockettes. Their first show was in 1969. Sylvester gets here in 1970. They had already been performing at the Palace Theater in North Beach, making a real ruckus. Again, it was one of the first times that many queer people could be together in a big kind of venue like that. And Sylvester really took to it. But he was, they were like all on acid and, a hot mess. But they were like it was fun and creative and full of glitter and experimentation with their identities. They were really trying to kind of go outside of identity and not like being as specific as we are today in our identity politic, but, kind of like, trying to be as out there as possible. So it's like the references were unidentifiable. And so why I think, the hate is really interesting in this story is that the counterculture was here and the gay counterculture was here. And then as the larger gay community was developing, there was kind of, lesbian culture had their own culture and was developing out of this really strong sense of feminism. the more radical gay culture of gay men and trans people were really coming, being very inspired by feminism. And so, but that more political side of like, yes, out of the bars, into the streets, gay is good message was really located here more in the Haight and more connected to the counterculture movement. Whereas in the Castro, there were more of the Castro clones, which is the, men
I
who
have
were
a picture here of the Castro and a quote about Sylvester. But yes, go on about the Castro clones.
Well, yeah, the clones. It was like, there was a lot of men who wanted to be identified with their, more outward presentation of masculinity, and that like, okay, we're gay, but we're not, but we can also be really butch. And, so there was a whole identity that went along with that. Not to say that every clone was so many people were clones. It was a look, it wasn't necessarily, but it wasn't like a political movement in the same way necessarily that the counterculture was really pushing all these edges of class and racism and feminism and anti-war and all of, free food in this neighborhood. I mean, this was really where the birth of all of that was happening and influencing music around the country. So Sylvester was obviously naturally very influenced, inspired by Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix, and, saw himself early on as a rock and roll star. And then the disco kind of came in just as like a fluke. It was what was happening. Why not throw my hat in the ring and see what happens? And it ended up being a major thing. So the point I'm trying to get to is that what I find really exciting is that there's the Castro clones, and then there's this gay counterculture, and Sylvester was really a bridge between the two of those. And that's why Sylvester, this exhibit, this immersive installation being here in the Haight is so special, because not a lot of people identify Sylvester with this environment. So we wanted to sort of bring it to life, including all of the buildings and the built space, and also the non-extant spaces, the places that are important to us that don't exist. So yes, of course, there's also a lot that was happening in the Castro that's extremely important. One person pointed out to me that, Harvey Milk's camera store, Sylvester loved taking photographs and was in there all the time. So it wasn't like Sylvester was only of, the Haight or only of the Castro. Sylvester was really a bridge between different kinds of identities of queer people. And, especially for what we call non-binary today, if someone who was like, Sylvester went on, on the Tonight Show with Joan Rivers and was like, so, tell me about drag. This is not drag, honey. This is Sylvester. I can be who I want on whatever day. So
I heard that was a pioneering conversation with Sylvester and Joan Rivers, where he was thanking her for being an early supporter of him and the way that he presented himself. So yeah, and you can, if you're just tuning in now, we are in the Disco Center of 1506 Haight Street. And I think also what's important about looking at a character of Sylvester, like you're doing, is what we kind of do is almost like a monoculture, like the Castro's only this, the Haight Ashbury's only this, Pacific Heights is only this, Fillmore is only this, but that's not true. People contributed to multiple neighborhoods and communities at the same time. And even when I read about Sylvester, that he was from Watts in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is where I grew up. So even there, I would think that he had an impact even from people who are born there, who would see how successful he became, as a leader for even the community down in Watts too.
And that's a piece of the history that has not been explored enough. Of course, in the book that you mentioned here, Joshua Gampson's amazing volume on Sylvester's history, it's the only really biography of its kind. The Fabulous Sylvester, it goes into detail about the whole Watts period of the early LA period, in which Sylvester was really part of a community called the Discotheques. And it was a group of middle-class Black trans women. And Sylvester was one of the leaders of the movement. They were like, would do hair and makeup. And Sylvester had all of these talents, was an incredible costumer, was even considering, working at a mortuary,
For makeup.
yeah, dressing people after, when the record deal came in here in
Right.
San Francisco.
He was going to work at a mortuary instead. Well, I'm glad he got that record deal.
Me too.
Because he changed history. So what I wanted to ask you about today, so I did go on a dress rehearsal of the show last week, and I was so inspired by it. I did take some photographs, and what I want people to get from this webinar is how different this production is from maybe other like historical walking tours that you might be thinking of. This one is very immersive and participatory, as you can tell from our background. So I have some information up here about your production. I thought maybe you could lead us through some of the people, your team behind your production.
Yeah. So the most important, I'd say, collaboration began for this project with Marvin K. White, who is a local writer who I have admired and been hearing for many years. We have friends in common, just being a part of the queer community, but Marvin's just has had so much success with his writing, and it's just, if you've ever heard Marvin perform his writing, something happens inside of you. There's something really transformative, really, about Marvin's writing. And I know that Marvin had done a celebration about Sylvester at Glide, actually, in 2018, and brought all these different people in, and then wrote special pieces about Sylvester and sort of bringing his memory back. And I thought, who could potentially write this piece, that would give it not just a, like a docudrama or a biopic kind of a feel, but something that was much more poetic and, something that was that would really inspire people to kind of go deeper inside and recognize not just the history of Sylvester, but where that star power is in themselves, which is really what Sylvester represented.
Well, you said this show is not about nostalgia. So that's what you're getting at, right? It's about looking forward. It
is, yeah. I mean, and we had to really confront, that question really head on with this project about Sylvester's presence versus Sylvester's absence. You can't erase the fact that Sylvester died of AIDS in 1988. And, along with many other super talented people who were part of our community and who were major leaders in our community. And this next generation, Sylvester's name has really gotten lost. Of course, now there's more interest in Sylvester, especially this year. I've been seeing it around the country. There was a whole story in, the LA Times, just several weeks ago. There was a Sylvester celebration in New York that was happening this year. Just coincidentally, it's just a lot of Sylvester stuff. But I knew that Marvin would be able to bring in a lot of Sylvester's influences. Sylvester was a very spiritual person, was raised in the church, was already a very talented singer at a very young age. His mom would take him on the church circuit and show him off, and he would really, sing around. So he always had that gift. And I knew that Marvin, being such a, spiritual leader and, would be able to bring that kind of, disco sensibility into it, because you just have to experience it. It's like Marvin uses the metaphor of the disco as a kind of tool of transformation. This is my interpretation. Tool of transformation for the queer community, for the gay community. And that era was, and that Sylvester really rose to fame, was this really critical moment that is really under-recognized. And then, there's the AIDS piece that, again, often, as is said by one of the people that I interviewed in the show, that, you hear all these voices of people from the neighborhood who knew Sylvester, worked with Sylvester, or lived here in the Haight. And you hear someone that says, people don't really recognize the impact that AIDS had on our community. It's kind of forgotten about, the lived sensibility. So it's not just that difficulty and that pain, because it's even hard to still talk about AIDS. But I knew that Marvin would be able to contextualize it within the realm of beauty and transcendence as well as feeling that deep sorrow and pain of our past and of our present. You know, all of the suffering that's going on in the world, the pandemic and the racism that is still here in our culture. So how do we uplift voices like Sylvester? And to answer your question, what this project, you know, hopes to do is to bring people into, you know, the presence of Sylvester, but also with the recognition of Sylvester's absence. So we're not trying to have, you know, there's nobody who's playing Sylvester or singing Sylvester. What it is giving you an experience, a lived experience of Sylvester in some of the places that he lived and worked, that we bring to life for you, that you actually participate in. So when you leave the performance, you actually go, I have a deeper sense and I have more curiosity, and I have felt some emotions and feelings myself, joy. You get to celebrate in the performance. You get to feel the depth of pain and loss and connect it to your own experience. And so that's how we kind of bring it present with Marvin's language and connect to now, but also the future, because if you don't know whose shoulders you're standing on, I don't know how you can really move forward.
Exactly. I think when I went to the show, I experienced like a human bonding moment with the other participants. So you do, it's very immersive. It's very immersive. And then, so it's directed by Michael French.
Michael French, yeah. And
I had the honor of meeting Michael during the rehearsal.
Michael is such a special human and such an incredible artist. It's been a huge honor getting to work with Michael. I just want to say too, Chris, this is the first show that I haven't directed.
Oh, okay.
And of this series and in our work. And I just, you know, more and more as the culture of creating theatrical productions like this that are immersive, the more we get into it, the more I've been trying to, like, you know, bring other collaborators in, and we've always done that. But this one I really wanted, you know, we've had other writers for many of the shows in the series, and so that remains. But this is the first one that we had an outside director come in and really direct the piece. And it was such a gift to be able to stand outside of it and really, you know, have the overall vision of, like, we want to really raise, you know, the voice of Sylvester, you know, literally and metaphorically. And Michael was such a perfect person to do that, because really, you know, did his best to really honor Marvin's writing, you know, came in, the whole process was like talking to Marvin and I for weeks and weeks before we actually even went into rehearsals, and then worked meticulously with me to cast the show, and then work, you know, for months on end with the two actors that bring the show to life. So it's been an incredible process. I think also the other thing that's really special is that, you know, Sylvester was a much bigger star in Europe before Sylvester was as major a star here. They kind of get things there a little bit quicker, maybe. I don't know. I mean, we're fabulous too.
No offense, United States.
But it, you know, it turns out that Sylvester's Mighty Real hit became a massive, you know, chart-topping hit in the UK. And I love that the director of the show is from the UK. Sylvester spent a lot of time there. He had a huge fan base in the UK, all over Europe, really, all over the world. So I just thought that was really interesting. And then also the visual artist that did the installation here.
Oh, let me do the next slide, then we can see the whole team. Working with
is Sharon Virtue up there on the top left. And Sharon is also from the UK.
Oh, interesting.
So it's like, you know, I wanted to work with Sharon on this project. We had been collaborators many years ago, and Sharon had followed this series and is just such a fabulous painter and visual artist, sculptor, and also had fallen in love with Sylvester and Sylvester's music a long time ago from a friend in the UK who's a DJ. And so it was so great to work with Sharon on this, because she just brings so much enthusiasm and just delight, a sense of delight and fun to the project.
A lot of
So
joy in here.
a lot of joy
yeah,
in
we're
here.
actually in the room. So you can see our disco light background.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely a lot of joy in this production, I think, and
Yeah.
a lot of deep thinking about the issues that surround us. And I don't think it's any coincidence that Sylvester is you're seeing Sylvester being noted not just here but in other references because of what's going on right now. In socioculturally. But tell me about like some of your actors here.
Yeah. So Nick Sommerfeld is he's one of the actors, and then there's Samora Valentino Divine, who the two of them, they play kind of futuristic characters, who come back and go, where is the queen? Who was the main queen? Trying to figure out like, who was this important person that we've forgotten about in this culture? They know that this person exists, but so many people have forgotten. So we kind of start with that. And they really come more from theater and drag background. So, and they just had this synergy from the very beginning that our director, Michael, really picked up on right away. And there's just like, they just love being in a room together. So they just really pop, they relate on that level of drag culture, underground, queer culture, fantasy, like they're both such magnetic performers, in their own right, and very different, in terms of, the kinds of things that they've done, but they're both, very, they've been around performing for many, many years.
They had a real synergy in the show for sure.
Yeah. And then them performing Marvin's writing is like a whole other thing. I mean, this is not like just a regular acting part, because Marvin writes in prose and poetry in this way that's it brings in so many references, so I don't think it was easy, but thanks to working with Michael, our director, was really a joy. He really helped them to really embody these characters and make it their own. So you really see them, but you see this third thing that they've really worked on very deeply. Samora is just such a joy. Wait until you see the dancing. And
I know, I have a picture I took, but it's there's a lot of action.
There's a lot of action.
And here you are, Seth, up here too. And how about the costume design?
Kipper is just such a superstar, both as a performer, but now, a really big deal, up and coming costume designer, created costumes for people on RuPaul's Drag Race, creates costumes for Darcy Drollinger at, the owner of Club Oasis, who's now our drag laureate. For her new films, will be upcoming, doing costumes for the Hedwig production that's opening this fall, and the Kinky Boots production. So we are so lucky to have gotten to work with Kipper, like a true visionary when it comes to costumes. Come for the costumes alone if you want to just come and see and feel like this inspiration that comes from all of these resources. Was really working with, Afrofuturism, was working with like, the 80s, was working with, disco. So there's all of these multiple references, kind of in a way the Cockettes did, but really different, really bringing that vision forward. You just have to kind of come.
You have to see it
and feel it. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
And definitely immersive.
And then
your sound
our sound designer, Ard, was really a fabulous professional to work with, has worked with pretty much every theater in town. And I had heard their work before and was super impressed. And, this was not an easy task, because it was a long time in the development. So it was a devised process is what we do. So we're like really working with the material and really honing it and really building it for the neighborhood, building it for this site. And then we had, as I mentioned, all of these interviews. So on the tour, you really hear the mixing of all of these voices of people who lived here and people who worked here and people who were in here at that moment. That was the big juncture of like, oh, wow, there is a gay identity. There is a gay community. When previously there hadn't been.
That's what, before we get to the tour, I wanted to shout out to all of the sponsors of this production. It's so important, as you know, to support nonprofit efforts like this. So thank you to all of
Oh my goodness.
these people who are helping to support Eisen Production Sylvester.
Yeah.
And also San Francisco Heritage. We are a community partner providing this space at 1506 Haight Street, where we're sitting right now live
Can
on
I say
this
something
webinar.
about all that?
Yes.
Not
go
enough can be said
ahead.
about the foundations and also San Francisco Heritage to be able to make art in the Bay Area right now, especially with the new laws, with the AB5 laws, with having to bring everyone on as employees. There's no more gig working. It's been very challenging post COVID in this weird COVID moment that we're in, where people are recovering. Many businesses are still shuttered here. So I think many industries are struggling, and certainly the theater industry is definitely struggling. I mean, there was an article in the Guardian, from the UK last week about theaters in the US really struggling. So deep gratitude for all of the foundations that really helped make this show a reality, including you guys at San Francisco Heritage, to be able to, we always say in theater, it's like you need space and time to do what we do. And this really wouldn't have been able to happen without your support, your help.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's a big pleasure to help support this. So we are at 1506 Haight Street, and we have some special, where can we get tickets to the show? I forgot I stuck this little slide in here with the little special zap tickets at eisen.org. And then we're going to show you some pictures from the tour itself.
Yeah, the show.
Tell me about how do I get tickets? Like, now I'm into this. Now, where do I get my tickets?
Yeah, I mean, you could actually get it on our you can go through our Facebook page, just go to, just type in Eisen Presents on Facebook and you'll find us. Or if you're on Instagram, you can also find us at Eisen Presents, and then in our bio, there's our LinkedIn, our link tree, and you can click on our link tree, and it has tickets, but you can just get them on our site at eisen.org, EYEZEN.org, and you'll be able to find tickets there. And the tickets are a range. We want to make it accessible for students and lower income people. We have lots of community people that are coming in to see the show. There's a whole group of seniors that are coming. There's several groups of students that are coming. So if you're a teacher teaching history or sociology, this is a really fantastic, live theater immersive experience to bring students into that really is connected to history. We run every week from Friday at noon and Saturday and Sunday at noon and 4 p.m. And the show runs about an hour and a half and is about a mile of walking with one hill in it. But if it's a group of folks that aren't able to do a hill or wheelchair bound or have accessibility issues, we can definitely accommodate. So definitely be in contact with us, info@eisen.org. You can reach out to us.
Yeah, it's less than a mile. And once you buy tickets, you meet at the big pink wall, and the address is up there on screen. And it's not a strenuous walk, like I'm not like a Pacific Heights walking tour, which it's not, the hill is not that steep, but there's a little bit of an incline. And then mostly you're on Haight Street for the most part.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the actual event itself. So one of the things for me, Seth, like I kept asking Seth over and over, like, what is this really? What is this really? And I had to do it to believe it. It's an immersive historic walking tour is probably the best description. You get a little radio, and then you follow around sort of the, what do we call that? The mothership?
The mothership.
You follow the mothership around Haight, and you get your own headphones. And explain to us, like, how does an audience person get involved with this here?
So the audience gets given a headset and a small radio, and then we broadcast on a short wave.
Oops.
And and that you hear the live audio, so you're not straining because the Haight is very loud.
Yes.
So the it's kind of like a like just kind of wearing your own headsets, or like the silent disco,
More, Seth. Here, come over here. There we go.
like like how silent disco is,
Yeah,
where you
right.
kind of like travel with a group and you can kind of dance together. We kind of created our own little mini radio station.
I appreciated that because it can be loud. So you wear your own headset, and then we walk around with this little radio, and the guide is.
So this is Brusha, who's Palmetto, who's one of the guides on the tour, who interestingly is the next generation of the Cockettes, who's like, part of this kind of really, reenactments of some of the Cockettes magic from the 70s. There's been a whole, like group of creative people in the arts, in drag, in theater, who have really gravitated towards the Cockettes. This amazing book, Fayette Hauser's book called The Cockettes, Acid, Drag, and History, kind of come together. It's all about the Haight, and it's a really colorful, beautiful book that's now out of print. But there's been a lot of research about, the Cockettes and recent, more interest over the past 10 years. And Brusha has been part of that group. They are part of this group called the Palace of Trash.
Okay.
And that started this, kind of in the vein of the Cockettes of like, using trash to kind of create something beautiful. So kind of like recycling junk. And they're fabulous character and personality who kind of introduces the tour and then starts to guide us. And then the two main actors really, who play these twins, are the ones who really walk us through the tour and tell us what to pay attention to, and then perform Marvin's script. So it's really place-based. So this house what's the history of this house? So this is one of the first stops on the tour. Yeah. So this was one of the places the Cockettes lived in the early years. I had the great pleasure and honor to interview Fayette Hauser, who was one of the Cockettes, and then also Peter Minton, who was Sylvester's accompanist and was also part of the Cockettes. Was a fantastic pianist who lived here in San Francisco for many, many years before moving to New York. So this house, we make a joke in the show of like, how many queens did they have in there? But, it was like dripping with, glitter and sequins. And, one person described it as like having all these shawls on the wall and like kind of separating rooms. And then like, when they were ready to go out at night, they just take the shawls off the wall and put one thing over another. So it was like, lots of things that were found, beautiful costumes. The Cockettes were really enamored with early film. And I know that you're really an expert really into film and that, and they really loved film noir, and they loved that sort of early, 30s, 40s, 50s aesthetic, and really kind of went into them. And that's kind of how Sylvester, found, his way into the Cockettes. Not all of that, wild drag mess, but Sylvester was like really played a character named Ruby Blue, who was the like, the singer who would come on and be this like featured star in their shows. So their shows would be like, props made out of cardboard, all painted and glittered, and like crazy, wildness. And then Sylvester would come in and sing a Billie Holiday song, or sing some of the the famous jazz singers from the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And he was an expert at that, having this incredible falsetto voice.
And he lived at this house.
And he lived at this house in 1970, and Peter told us about, the piano was like in the kitchen, and we really get to like feel like what the place was. But, they were constantly like, they'd have their candles out and they'd be doing rituals, and, they were on acid half of the time or most of the time.
Right.
And, fire, the place caught on fire, and it was like one of many places that they lived. But it was a significant place because, they remember the nexus of that moment when they were all living there before Hibiscus, the leader, showed up, and everyone was so excited. Hibiscus is coming, and he walked up the street, and Fayette was sitting on the steps there. And then we found this incredible photograph that you get to see in the show of Sylvester just having, bought a brand new outfit in these amazing, these amazing shoes. I was trying to show my shoes, like, those shoes that are they're pumps, but they like strap up the calf.
Yeah.
Sylvester was just so excited to like show those off and, step down on the steps here. And we have this incredible, photo that Peter Minton took. And we talked to the San Francisco Public Library, who owns Peter's collection. They were happy to let us, use that photo, and you'll now see it on the front door when you come here to 1506.
Okay, I think I'm going to check that out on my way out.
Yeah.
So part of it, when you're on the tours, you're hearing different. You obviously did a lot of research, so you're hearing interviews with people. I think I have a next slide here. So here we are walking, and you'll be able to, you hear interviews in snips of quotes about Sylvester as you're walking through the Haight-Ashbury district. And what was so interesting about that is I felt in a surreal moment a little bit, because I'm listening to the past while I'm walking through the site. And then also this is on the right-hand side, you'll see the mothership, which is the portable broadcast station, which I was so impressed with. And we're just following the troop here up the street.
We developed that over 2 different shows. During the pandemic, when we did our first show here at 1506, which starred Tina D'Elia, who played both Hibiscus and Peggy Caserta. And at the time, we only had the storefront window as the set. So the audience would sit on stools in front of the window and could hear through the headset what she was saying in the window.
Oh, that's great.
And then she'd come out and be with us. So it was really safe for her and everyone else. But then that led us to like, oh, what else could we do with it? So, you hear all the audios, you hear the music, you hear, this incredible, audio mix that our sound designer created for us. So it's, you're hearing the actors speak live, as well as hearing all of these interviews.
Yeah, and music was going on too. I mean, it's just a really interesting way to present a neighborhood. I think very immersive. So I wish I need to do something like that for Alfred Hitchcock, right? So we can hear Bernard Herrmann while we're walking around. All right, so we're following the mothership, and then one of the stops is this church, and which is on Haight Street, and which is a significant place for Sylvester. You want to tell us about this building?
Yeah. So this is a church. I don't want to give too much away, but as I said before, the church itself was really important for Sylvester symbolically, having grown up in the church, seeing people perform musically in this gospel setting and learning to sing like that, to be able to express oneself, was a really major part of Sylvester's growing up. So there are a number of churches in the neighborhood. There's like All Saints down the street, and there's a gay priest that's over there who's like walks the neighborhood and is like, the neighborhood priest. This church actually, you would know more about the architecture than me, but this is one of the buildings they actually transformed into housing. So it's actually a senior housing facility.
Is it? Oh, yeah. I wondered about that. Okay.
And so one of the things I love is just like seeing all the people that live in this neighborhood. You have tourists, you have gay people, straight people, people from all classes, races. It's a real, the Haight is really it's a true melting pot.
It is very diverse.
A lot of people don't know that this was really an African-American community, like after, in the 1940s and 50s, when the Western Addition was really being demolished, like 2,000 houses were taken down to rebuild that neighborhood. A lot of Black families were displaced, and some of them were rehoused in the Haight.
Okay.
So this neighborhood was more than 50% Black. And so, it's also got that one of the things I was really interested in was how did Black community that was living here, along with, all of the Jewish community that was also in this neighborhood, the Irish community that was also in this neighborhood for many, many years. and the gay community. And what was that intersection like?
Mm-hmm.
So, churches are always a place where people come together and gather, and but also for the gay community, it was very difficult for us. When people were getting AIDS, they were really pushed away by their families, by their churches, by, not all of them, obviously. Sylvester had a church that he belonged to in the East Bay that was very welcoming. But this was one of very few, Glide was one of very few churches that was welcoming to gay people, and especially when we were confronting, AIDS and this horrible, pandemic. So we come here symbolically, as you know, like in every neighborhood, right? It goes through a transformation, and the buildings where the history happened don't always exist.
Right, that's true.
And so part of what we're doing is we're talking about the places symbolically, So we found a beautiful church, if you want to know the truth.
Well, I really appreciate it because it was a great place to deliver that message that you just said while you're looking at this beautiful preserved structure. And so, like you said, not every place makes it, but that's what's so important about continuing the storytelling that you're doing.
Yeah, but just to say, it's not just something like, do it randomly. There's a really sensitive juxtaposition. We wanted so much to actually be in Buena Vista Park, but to be honest, we couldn't really afford the permitting. This is one of the ways that, unfortunately, the city of San Francisco isn't so supportive in this kind of work. We really had hoped to be able to be on the steps. We got all the way to the last part, but the cost was just exorbitant, because we had a story about Buena Vista Park that we really wanted to tell, which is that was a big hangout for gay people, especially in the 1960s on. It was written about in magazines and books and tour books, that this was a place where gay people could meet, because we couldn't legally meet anywhere.
Right.
So we had to find safe places that we could meet. And oftentimes it would be in hiding. So we're juxtaposing the church, against one of our great meeting places. Are you welcome or are you not welcome? So we're really trying to bring that conversation without being spot on about it. So it's to really bring the energy of the neighborhood, to bring the energy and the essence of those stories and put them together, right?
I've heard people talking about the Castro Theater in that same way, that it was a safe space for the community members to get to meet each other.
Yes.
And so it was more than just a theater. It was the whole building became a sacred space.
That's right.
For the Castro community.
Yeah. And you ask anyone, in some of the interviews that we did, one of the reasons that was people like Alan Barabay, who was an incredible gay historian back in the day, and others who would give lectures and who showed films, who did some of the first, gay, documentaries, like the Harvey Milk film, that had its
premiered there.
Premiered there. Many, many famous films that we got to learn about our history happened at the Castro. So it was like a place where we really got to learn more about ourselves. And this is what's really important for communities, minority communities especially. How do we learn our own history? And how do we share our histories with the larger community? It's not like, oh, this is my history, Chris, but you can't participate in it. It relates to you as well.
Right. Well, this was a great way for me, and I brought my sons on this tour, so you can see we're walking right here in these pictures past some of these Haight-Ashbury landmarks, and then we end up at 1506, which is where we're sitting right now. That's the storefront of the historic Doolin Larson building, which was donated to San Francisco Heritage some time ago by Norm Larson. And so we are inside right now, and that's part of the way we get to this. And here this is the space we're in, and we have the lights going to make it real disco. But here's some scenes, and the whole thing is where you're interpreting this different period, and this is this period of celebration, right? So explain what happens in this space.
Can you go back one picture?
Oh, go back one.
Yeah. So on the right hand side there, this is the window that Sharon Virtue created. And so on the right hand side photo, but on the right side of the photo you see Sylvester, and then on the left hand side what we did was we tried to recreate some of the buildings, some of the venues that were gay bars and businesses. And one of them, if you look closely, you can see the Cadillac, which was the Deluxe right across the street.
Deluxe.
And that just really permanently closed. And then if you look on the right in the center, you see the I-beam. So getting back to the conversation we were having about the church, does the church specifically relate? No, it does not. But it brings in symbolically the feeling of church, the background of church, the importance of church in Sylvester's life. The I-beam, which doesn't exist anymore because it was demolished, along with the Haight Street Theater that became the famous Straight Theater that Janis and the Grateful Dead and Jimi Hendrix and on all performed at right up the street here on Cole Street, was the same exact block, Chris, that the I-beam was. Now, this was an historic building that was the what's it called, the Freemason Hall. And so they had this hall. It was a huge venue, and on the corner of Cole there and Haight was the Haight Street Theater. So in the early 60s, a gay couple, it was like no longer a movie house. People weren't seeing films there, and this gay couple came in and was like, we want to start, a venue where we can show gay films. Well, the neighborhood at the time was not into it at all. In fact, they sent their teenage kids out with protest signs saying, "Down with the Queens, we want Tarzan." And we have photos of that.
That's very funny.
As if Tarzan wasn't like the gayest symbol of all time.
Right, I know, kind of ironic.
Yeah. But anyway, they got booted out. They didn't really like us being in the neighborhood and of that venue. And then it became the Straight Theater, meaning not gay and straight, but like straight as in, oh, it's a straight place, like we don't get high or whatever. But it was a big, stoner fest in there. Yeah. And it was a really special venue. So that was on the same block as the I-beam. Okay. But there was a lot of scandals that went through. You can read more about it on a number of different websites. Hoodline has articles about it. Shaping San Francisco, our former community partner, has an incredible history about the Haight Street Theater and the I-beam. So you can read more about it on those websites, which are foundsf.org. And so we wanted to bring that back to life, but it didn't. It doesn't exist. So what we did with 1506 is we recreated the space. Now, of course, this was like, a 3,000 square feet major disco with a massive sound, but we don't have 3,000 square feet. So we built it into this, 400 square foot, storefront with, what did it used to feel like when you would stand in line outside of the I-beam? Now, many people that have come to the tours and people have written to us going, oh my God, is the I-beam going to be in it? But the I-beam doesn't exist. So we had to kind of recreate it to give people a feeling of what does it feel like to actually be in a space and belong and have good times where you can dress up. We have racks of costumes where you can. Yeah,
you get to dress up during the show because I had a little hat, a chapeau on.
So it's really a lot of fun.
So, all right. So here we are in the space and it's decorated for the show. We're facing that wall of newspaper articles, which I'm assuming are pertinent to the life and times of Sylvester.
That's right. Yeah. This was a really, one of the many collaborations we did in terms of research were with the GLBT Historical Society, where we got to see Sylvester's archives. One of my favorite things to do is I'm an archive geek, so I love being in the archives. Yes. We have that in common. Yes. And then another collaboration was with the BAR, who was, one of the longest running gay newspapers in the country and had, an incredible archive. All of these things have been scanned and we're able to really look at all of the things that were happening in both gay liberation, but also in Sylvester's era and in Sylvester's life. So you get to see, some of Sylvester's early gigs in the 70s, Sylvester appearing in the movie The Rose. I don't know if you knew about that. Sylvester, marching in the Gay Freedom Day parade in 1988. the year he died, when he really became a symbol for people being out about their diagnosis of AIDS. And, you know, he really became the face of that. It's like, this is nothing to hide. You know, we're dying of this disease. How do we show the pride that we have, you know, and really be ourselves?
Yeah. So that's what we're looking at. I could see Bay Area Reporter, a couple of articles from all different periods up here on the wall, which is part of the exhibit that you're part of in the immersive sense of the show. And then we get some dancing, we get some music and a little bit disco. Everybody dresses up with scarves and hats. And
there's some amazing sculptures here by the artist Jethro Patalinghog. It's amazing local Filipino artist who was inspired by disco and queer ancestors and made these heads and, you know, busts that are all like sort of disco infused, that are like sequins, and, you know, they feel like a disco ball, but they're body parts. Glitter.
And then when we go on the tour, it sort of takes a little bit of a turn and we talk about more serious topics. So about the AIDS crisis. And do you want to talk about like that part of the show? Like, you know, as we get into that, we leave 1506 and we go to another site.
Yeah. So, you know, we get to hear the voices of like really what was happening for people in our community. You know, we got to this very high moment of disco and freedom. It was like really our first 10 years out of the closet. And then suddenly we're hit with this, you know, with this horrible moment that we really had to cope with. But we, you know, San Franciscans really rise to the occasion and became, you know, really important around the world for the leadership, for the ways in which we as a community showed up for one another, especially the lesbian community, especially the different volunteer organizations like Shanti and Maitri, the very first AIDS hospice that was Buddhist inspired, and Coming Home Hospice. There was an incredible, exemplary you know, message of care in our community. And this is how it's done. So, you know, that was not easy. You know, you can watch the movie 5B that talks all about the San Francisco General AIDS Ward and what that was like. Politically, what was it like for the people on the front lines? What was it like for the people who were, you know, in ACT UP, really trying to get the government to get not just gay people, but women, people of color, you know, we're suffering from this and we're not getting any, you know, visibility. We're not getting the care and the treatment that was available at the time. Okay, it wasn't such great treatment in the beginning, but there wasn't even a chance for many people. So this is a moment that we get to really, you know, bring some of that history into you know, part of the history that we're telling, the history of this neighborhood. It really wiped out a whole generation of incredibly creative people. Patrick Cowley, who was a very important collaborator of Sylvester's, and who really created that kind of computerized, was like beginnings of electronic music. Was trained here at City College or San Francisco State, I forget which, and really brought and infused that more electronic music into the disco sound here in San Francisco, and was partly responsible with Sylvester of music that was really of that era. How do we go through this incredibly horrific pandemic where all of our friends are dying by the dozens every week and still celebrate our bodies, you know, that this is not punishment for us. You know, this is not, you know, God getting back to us, which is what the right was saying at the time. Jerry Falwell, you know, Anita Bryant, all these people that were going, we don't want gay people teaching our children because they're going to give them AIDS. You know, it was like coming here and bringing that horrible, hateful message that really perpetuates the violence that we see today with all of these bannings of drag. So, you know, we really wanted to like talk about the past with bringing in the future. Marvin wrote this incredible piece that is voiced by the actors, but also by some other local talent who you get to hear their voices reading these prayers and invocations about how do we contextualize what happened? How do we not forget what happened so that we can use some of what we learned to move forward and help us be stronger as a community as a whole?
It was very moving to be in that room there and feel some of that with the words and getting into the past, but also looking towards the future. Then in the end, we end up back here for the moment of redemption, I suppose we could call it. So this would be the finale of the show. And your two leads are reading from this gigantic book about the saints and everything. So walk us through this moment.
Marvin created this idea of, this book of sequins that would be like, like our Bible, like the book of truth of queer liberation. But elevating Sylvester to sainthood. How could someone as important, as symbolic, who really, created the roadmap for non-binary people, for, gender non-conforming people, who's not really that well remembered, how could we elevate their story to this point? So we get to, make our own saints, in the mythology that we're creating here.
Yeah, this is great when they're reading through all the saints and invoking that.
So you see Jethro's sculptures, you see Sharon's incredible installation, Marvin's incredible language. I can't tell you how many people over this past weekend was like, oh my God, the writing is so incredible. It's like so touched. Can I have a printed copy of it? And it's very, very moving material.
Yeah. Well, I loved it. And I think here is the one of the last slides. So here is Seth with my two sons, Levi and Gideon, some Gen Zs interested in the past and the future, dragging it out into the open. I just realized we've been talking for a whole hour already, Seth. So I wanted just to sort of wrap it up and remind everyone that you can get tickets at izen.org, and the shows will be on Friday and Saturday, and you can reserve in advance if you'd like, and all of the information is there on their website. So I wondered, I'm going to stop screen share and we can see if we have any. I don't think we have any Q&As here. So what I would say is okay, great, we are good. So Seth, let's close it up. What do you want to tell everybody about coming to your show?
Well, I love that image that you were showing just before we ended there with the slide. Thank you for taking all those great pictures.
Oh, you're welcome. I had so much fun.
It was so fun. Drag It Out into the Open was a protest sign that some queens did in as part of the Compton's riots that happened in the Tenderloin here. Another really important historic moment in our history of really getting more rights for especially trans people of color in San Francisco. So that's really part of this same history, that the Compton's cafeteria riots that happened there was really a turning point in the community where especially spiritual leaders got together and like, we've got to stop this. There's violence that's happening from the police towards queer people, especially trans people of color. And that really opened the gateway for Jose Sarria to be, one of the first out Latinx person to run for public office in San Francisco around the same period, and also the rights that we benefit from today. So it's really important to contextualize Sylvester's history in the larger history of San Francisco liberation that we are still working on to today. So you get to really participate in something that really focuses on a very important person whose legacy really needs to be known, Sylvester, in the context of the larger context of gay liberation in San Francisco. So Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, and recognizing, of course, the historic places that make this type of production possible. So we are going to wrap it up. I want to thank you, Seth, again for joining us today, and I really appreciate it. Again, you can get tickets at izen.org. And I forgot to introduce myself. This is Chris Madrid French with San Francisco Heritage, and I want to thank everybody for your continued support. We're at sfheritage.org, and we hope to see you at Seth's show in one of these upcoming weekends. And one last thing, Seth, how long does it run until?
It runs till October 1st, but I'd say get your tickets soon, because in this day and age, we can't guarantee that it will last until October 1st if we don't have
No,
an
it'll
audience.
be sold out.
Well,
that happens to me a lot.
It has been sold out. Yeah,
it's been sold out. So, and the weather is perfect right now to come down to Haight Street and enjoy this tour. So once again, thank you very much, Seth. And we'll see everybody soon. And thank you for joining San Francisco Heritage.
Okay.